Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is Métis National Council President Clément Chartier. President Chartier is a lawyer, a writer, lecturer, and activist who has served many Indigenous peoples' organizations. In 2003, he was elected president of the Métis National Council and is currently serving his fourth term. President Chartier, real pleasure to have you here on the fifth term. A pleasure to have you here on the show. The Métis National Council has recently held its General Assembly, and one of the topics was of identity and identity theft being a big focus. Why was this important for the Métis National Council to bring forward?
Yes, and thanks for the introduction. I have served in many organizations, but currently serve in the government of the Métis Nation. Mm-hmm. And as a government, we want to ensure that we know and people know who we are governing. So I represent the historic Métis Nation based in Western Canada. And identity is very important to us because historically when the term Métis was used, it was always in reference to the historic Métis Nation in Western Canada, and it was a proper noun. Over the last 30 years or so, and particularly the last few years, it's starting to be used as an adjective to mean anybody of mixed ancestry, and more like a dictionary definition. And we need to resist that. We need to let people know that the Métis basically equates to the Métis Nation. And so there are many peoples now cropping up, as I was saying, throughout particularly Eastern Canada, mm-hmm. Who say we're Métis. And it's by the hundreds of thousands now. And not only are they appropriating the term Métis Nation to describe themselves as organizations as opposed to as a people, they're also expropriating symbols like our Métis Nation flag. So it's important that we make this clear and make a stand.
We recently had Daryl LaRue on, who was also a speaker at the General Assembly, to talk very much about this. And one of the things that we did talk about was the recent Memorandum of Understanding with the Métis National Council and the Mi'kmaq Nation. What are you hoping to achieve with an MOU like that?
Well, basically it's to educate the Canadian public generally, and also it's an alliance between, not an alliance, but it's a relationship between the Mi'kmaq Nation and the Métis Nation, two distinct peoples in different parts of the country, but respecting each other's sovereignty and the right to exist, on the basis of self-determination, and to our cultures, respectively. And basically, they are being threatened by people who now purport to be Métis, based on whatever criteria they think, they have the right to do that on, some distant Indian ancestors, perhaps, and some not even that, but deciding to call themselves Métis. So I know they're having a difficult time, mm-hmm. and while we can assist them in their struggle in terms of, their nationhood and their territory, at the same time, we can educate them about us, and they're beginning to learn about us, and they know that we are, a distinct people based in Western Canada.
What's the struggle for the Métis Nation with this rise of the so-called Eastern Métis?
Well, I think it's the perception in the public, right? Now people are coming forward and saying, well, Métis are just anybody of mixed ancestry, something we worked for generations to try to overcome. In the 80s, we had to say, no, there's the big M Métis, which is the Métis Nation, the little M Métis, those that are going by a strict dictionary definition of saying we're of mixed ancestry. It needs more than that to make a nation, a people, and we possess that. In Western Canada, we have a distinct geographic homeland. We have a population. We have the language Michif. We have the political consciousness. We've defended ourselves militarily as well. And so we just need to get that out there. And so people now are coming forward, particularly in Eastern Canada, and using these bogus cards to sell to the people that join their organizations, using them to bilk, salespeople for, cars or other mm-hmm. Pieces of machinery. It's negative. It's towards the Métis Nation, towards the true Métis people. And I think it's starting to work negative with respect to the Mi'kmaq as well, because with the abuse of these cards, people will start thinking, well, these Mi'kmaq cards, are they also legitimate? So it's something we need to address.
As we reported on this, the Métis people self-identifying out there went from 600 and some to tens of thousands. But are we also seeing a huge increase here on the prairie provinces?
Well, yes, actually there has been. The Métis National Council, after years of consultation in 2002, adopted criteria of who can register as a citizen of the Métis Nation. And because of the progress we've made, beginning actually in the 70s, there were people coming forward saying we're Métis, and some probably weren't, but they did get services, housing and education. But now, as of 2002, we have criteria, fairly strict criteria, and all our people have to re-register. And that's the issue in Ontario. They're saying, no, we're not going to re-register the people that we have signed up. And so, since we've also been winning hunting and fishing rights cases, as you mentioned, I'm a lawyer, and I've actually been doing Métis test case, fishing and test cases. And in 1995, we won a substantial case in Northwest Saskatchewan, and we upheld in Court of Queen's Bench. We've also won other cases. And so as more of this is coming forward in terms of recognition of our rights, and particularly since 1982, there are people coming forward now identifying as Métis who never did before. And so it's happening within our nations as well. But if they can connect to a historic Métis community and can give the genealogy, then we're saying, well, okay, you may be coming a bit late and, coming now, but you do have that right if we do go strictly by, the descendants of the historic Métis community. But we are seeing new peoples coming forward, and some of them may not necessarily understand our culture and traditions, but, perhaps are willing to learn. So it's happening to an extent in the prairies, but definitely in Eastern Canada, it's by the hundreds of thousands that are cropping up now.
And as I said, we are on the heels of the sitting of the General Assembly, and one of those things that came up was a resolution that looked at suspending the Métis Nation of Ontario based on its perceived acceptance of non-Métis citizens and communities. What's believed to have gone on here?
Well, when we set up the Métis National Council, March 8th of 1983, and actually I was the first national representative, we didn't say president, we stated very clearly our homeland basically is encompassed by the three prairie provinces, extends into northwestern Ontario, northeastern BC, part of the Northwest Territories, and northern United States. And in 1994, we accepted the Métis Nation of Ontario, but based on that criteria, based on that understanding. But after that, they basically have interpreted that in their own way. And so now there's membership, throughout Eastern Ontario that has no connection to the historic Métis Nation. And while we brought resolutions forward and saying, you got to correct this, you got to follow the 2002 criteria that our Métis General Assembly adopted, they, in August of last year, came forward with these 6 new Métis communities declared by themselves and the Government of Ontario. And most of those communities don't have any connection to the historic Métis Nation at all. So they're making it very clear, and it's very much in our face, that they're doing this. So in December of last year, I was given the mandate to initiate an examination of this issue in Ontario, and I made my report and my recommendation. One of them was to suspend the Métis Nation of Ontario until they met certain conditions for readmission into our government. And also I made a recommendation that we adopt a homeland map so it makes absolutely clear geographically where our homeland is. And so those passed, but the Métis Nation of Ontario, of course, didn't accept it. The Métis Nation of Alberta supported them, but we had enough votes from the Métis in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and 1 or 2 from British Columbia that enabled us to move forward. So we're doing that. We're moving forward, and they have a year. I had recommended suspension immediately. The leadership, in their wisdom, said, okay, let's go with the suspension, but let's give them 1 year, a probation period of a year, to meet the conditions for continuing representation in our government. So a year is pretty good. The Métis Nation of Ontario president before that said all she needed was 3 to 4 months to come forward with the, a legitimate list of Métis Nation citizens. So it actually has 3 times that amount of time. So we're hoping that they will meet those conditions and will remain part of our governance system. But for those that aren't citizens of the historic Métis Nation, then we're saying they have no right to be part, of our government in terms of the historic Métis Nation.
So what does the probation actually mean for those who are part of the Métis Nation of Ontario?
Well, basically for the next year, it's status quo. They're given a year to come forward and do what they should have been doing over the past decade, is come forward with only those who are legitimate citizens of the historic Métis Nation. And we say that includes Northwestern Ontario and those Métis Nation citizens who have moved to the province of Ontario. The same situation is in British Columbia. The majority of Métis in the province of British Columbia are from the prairie provinces, either first generation or second generation, but they are part of our governance system. But they live outside of our homeland, outside of northwestern or northeastern British Columbia. So there's room for them, but they just have to be part of our nation. So it's like the Cree saying, to be part of the Cree Nation, you must be Cree. If you're Haudenosaunee, then you can't belong to us. You belong to the Haudenosaunee. So we're just saying, to be part of our people, part of our governance system, you have to be one of us. If you're not one of us, then sorry, you have to, look at some other way to represent yourselves.
You mentioned the map of the Métis homeland, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but I just have to throw to a quick break, and then we'll be back to continue our conversation here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Métis National Council President Clément Chartier. And as we mentioned, President Chartier, delegates at the General Assembly also approved a map of the Métis homeland. Why was this important to come forward and deal with?
Well, we've been giving descriptions of our homeland. It was felt necessary that we put it on a map so that it's visual, that you can actually see where our geographic territory is. And so we've done that because now it's easier for us to say, if you're not part of this geographic homeland historically, and if you've moved to other parts of the country, in this case Ontario, you're still eligible to be enrolled. Okay, if you're in Quebec, or if you're in the Maritimes, if you're part of the historic Métis Nation, you have the right to be enrolled as a citizen of the Métis Nation. Doesn't matter where you live. So it was important for us to actually put it down so people can see this is where the homeland is. And I know it is a rather large area, but the Métis Nation did extend quite large geographically in Western Canada, because we were quite involved in the fur trade through the freighting on the rivers and also through the cart trails. And we coexisted with the First Nations people, the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, and so on. And so, it's a coexistence, and that's been recognized in law. It's been recognized historically. And with us, they dealt with us on an individual basis through this script process, or lands under the Manitoba Act, whereas with First Nations, they dealt with First Nations by treaty and dealt with them as a collective. But for us, they dealt with us as individuals, I believe, because they wanted to break our military strength, our cohesiveness as a people. But it hasn't succeeded. We're still here. And so we don't claim all of this land as ours exclusively. We say we coexist and have joint ownership with, the various First Nations that also cover the same geographic territory. And
there has been a swift reaction to this map from many First Nations because it is on treaty territory. What do you say to some of that?
Well, I say that the treaty territories overlap our territory, which is fine. Like I say, it's coexistence. There's no one exclusive to the other. And we will continue to be negotiating, with respect to our land rights. The Supreme Court of Canada has affirmed that Section 31 of the Manitoba Act, where there was 1.4 million acres that was to have been transferred to the Métis, was not done in the way that recognized the honor of the Crown. And for the rest of the Métis outside of that original postage stamp province, they dealt with us through an amendment to the Dominion Land Act, which saw a process of outright ownership, fee simple lands transferred to to Métis individuals or individually, and that covers the 3 prairie provinces, the Northwest Territories. And so we're saying that was so fraudulent that we still have unextinguished Aboriginal title to these lands and resources in Western Canada. And for First Nations, they have the treaties, and they've had their reserves set aside from the treaties. But we still have to be dealt with. Our Aboriginal title, as far as we're concerned, still exists in Western Canada, and it coexists with, First Nations land rights.
One other thing from the sitting of the General Assembly, because it was a busy one for you, and that was to take whatever actions necessary, including legal action, to have, quote, so-called Métis organizations cease from using the term Métis and the use of the Métis flag. We've already received an email from the Congress of Aboriginal People saying that the Métis National Council does not own the Métis flag. No one owns the Métis flag. What's your response to that?
Well, basically, we're not saying not to use the term Métis. We don't own that term. What we're saying is the term Métis Nation. For example, in Nova Scotia, there's at least 2 organizations that use the term Métis Nation to describe their organization. And the Métis Nation is not an organization. The Métis Nation is a people, a distinct people, based primarily in Western Canada and depicted as you saw on our map. And we're saying that they should not be using that terminology. It's like if the Mi'kmaq were trying to call themselves the Cree, they're not. They're Mi'kmaq. And I'm not saying that these people calling themselves Métis are actually Métis, just an analogy. And in terms of the Métis Nation flag, well, that is our flag. Our flag, we first flew in battle in 1816. We're into our 202nd anniversary of our Métis Nation flag. It's ours, and we've took steps to protect it. We have it as an official mark of the Métis Nation government, as well as the term Métis Nation. We have that as an official mark of our Métis Nation government, and it's only governments that have the capacity to get official marks. So we have those protected, and we're going to at some point have to move on it, because again, these so-called Métis Nation organizations in Eastern Canada, when you see them on TV, they're using our Métis Nation flag, which is again giving a wrong impression to the Canadian public. I mean, they're not us, and they shouldn't be using our flag. It's like, the government of the United States or the government of Spain, shouldn't be out there, carrying, the Canadian flag. It's not their flag. They have their own. And if they want one, they get their own, whatever that may be. But it's our flag. Leave it alone.
You're going to be sitting down with Canada's First Ministers soon, and one of the big issues with the federal government is the recognition and implementation of rights framework that they've now hit the pause button on, but the Métis Nation would still like to see this move ahead. What is it about that framework that you're in favor of?
Well, I'm not sure if they put the pause button on. That's not the impression I get. Maybe it's slowed, but the impression I get is they're still planning on proceeding with it. We have experienced in the past that if it's only policy, a change of government could also change that policy. And that framework is to replace the comprehensive claims process policy and the 1995 inherent right, implementation of the inherent right to self-government policy, both of which don't benefit the Métis Nation. And in fact, in 1981, then Minister of Justice Jean Chrétien wrote us letters saying that whatever Aboriginal rights and title we have had been extinguished, and therefore cut off our Aboriginal rights research. And so that was the end of the story there. So we had no alternative but to go to the courts, which is what the Manitoba Métis Federation did at that particular time, and so which we have to do in other parts of the homeland as well. That's our only option. Right now we have a permanent bilateral mechanism process with the Prime Minister, and we're hoping on a distinctions-based approach, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation, we're hoping that we get this framework agreement because it's going to entrench in legislation a process which will be of major benefit to the Métis Nation. If other nations don't want it, other Indigenous nations don't want it because they feel comfortable with what they have, then that's fine. But we're saying we need it, we want it, and on a distinctions-based approach, there's no reason why the federal government cannot proceed with respect to Métis Nation-specific framework legislation.
President Chartier, I'll have to hold you there for a second while we step aside for one more break, and then we'll be back to continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Métis National Council President Clément Chartier. And I'd like to talk a bit about the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's coming to an end. The women of the Métis Nation recently raised its concerns about the inquiry. And in the statement, you're quoted as saying, and we're going to bring it up here, so I won't get into all of it, but that it's unfortunate that the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in its final report will not reflect the perspective of the Métis Nation, and that from the Métis Nation point of view, the anticipated report will in effect be a report on missing and murdered First Nations and Inuit women exclusively. I guess maybe President Chartier, a little on why you feel that way.
Well, basically, it's been the nature of inquiries and the nature of federal government initiatives. For example, the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, we've been excluded. I went to Métis Residential School for 10 years. We're still excluded. Mm-hmm. And we're excluded from all of these policies, comprehensive claims and all of these. And on this national inquiry, basically, I think people tend to discount the Métis Nation because we've been suppressed for so many years, like over 100 years. We're just now coming into the political limelight, so to speak, and our issues are being dealt with. And with this inquiry, I think they discount that these things happen to Métis people. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I'm very disappointed because I was actually looking forward to the opportunity to appear as an individual because my mother was brutalized and murdered, and justice still hasn't been done. But I didn't get that chance. I looked for it, but the commission, the inquiry, never contacted my office at all. Mm-hmm. They did call me finally when they wanted an extension, saying the chief commissioner would like to speak to you by phone. I said, okay, we set a time. No call ever came. And I've been getting this same message from the women of the Métis Nation, that they're really not being, involved in the way that they should be. So a lot of people have been missed out. And we didn't want to go at the end to some process where they're going to say, oh yeah, but we did this for the Métis were included. So we just made the statement that, look, here's another instance where the Métis Nation has not really been involved in a meaningful way.
We only have about a minute left here with a lot to talk about, but when we're talking about exclusion, and one of those things is the 60 scoop settlement, and maybe if you can, for those who don't know, the Métis have been left out of that settlement, maybe if you can give us, in a 25 seconds, an update on where that is for Métis adoptees.
Well, okay, I've asked President David Chartrand to lead this file. We've had several meetings now, and he reported today on it. We're basically getting closer to, I think, a resolution, working with Ministers Philpott and Bennett. We have some strong suggestions or indications that we're going to move forward. Minister Bennett would like to negotiate it politically rather than go to court. So we feel confident.
President Chartier, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Unfortunately, we all are all out of time.
Thank you.